You think that rusty scrap heap is gonna race, sweetheart? Mocking laughter rippled through the pit zone as Zoe Turner rolled her scratched-up naked bike into the garage bay, her khaki jacket caked in dry road dust. That thing'll snap in two on the first corner. One. Bookie jeered, tossing cash to the ground in mock challenge. Zoe didn't say a word. She just knelt and quietly refitted the spark plug someone had yanked loose. No one knew. The woman they shoved off the track that night would be the one to force an entire racing circuit to rewrite its own rules. A loud booming voice broke through the swirl of late-night exhaust fumes. Move that junk heap over there. We got real bikes that need space. The speaker was a tall man in a grease-stained vest, a local mechanic known for patching together the flashiest street machines in the Midwest. He hadn't bothered to look Zoe in the face. Instead, he pointed a wrench vaguely in her direction as though warding off a stray dog. Nearby, a cluster of glam-flaunting female bikers, all clad in tight-fitting leathers, embroidered with neon skull designs, eyed Zoe's faded khaki jacket with open scorn. One of them smirked and nodded toward her friend, who stepped forward with a showy strut. "Seriously, honey," she said, voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Did you think this was the local riding club for stay-at-home moms?" Behind her, another woman snorted and flipped the tinted visor of her polished helmet. "Should have stayed in the bleachers." That was only the beginning. A gambler, one of the regulars who circulated the pit-collecting bets, sidled up with a roll of cash in his hand. He had gold rings on 3 fingers and a smirk that screamed easy money. "You know, if you actually make it past the qualifier," he drawled, "I might just give you my entire stack. Toss in the bike too while I'm at it." He flicked a $5 bill onto the concrete in front of Zoe's dusty boots. "Though it won't matter because you won't even start," he said with a sneer, pulling out a spark plug from his own pocket as if daring her to notice it was missing from her engine. A few onlookers chuckled, delighting in the cheap sabotage. In the swirl of heady gasoline odor and flickering garage lights, Zoe remained on her knees by the bike, slipping her hand inside the engine housing to confirm what she already suspected: they had tampered with her ride. When a hush fell, another mocking voice rose. This one belonged to Viper, self-proclaimed king of the Midwest midnight rally. He lounged against a gleaming black cruiser that must have cost more than most people's mortgage. Tall and lean, with a face half hidden by a snakehead bandana, Viper was the type who could clear a crowd with a single glare. "Little girl wandered into the wrong place," he announced, arms folded. "This ain't driver's ed tonight." Around him, a ripple of laughter broke out, each burst sharper than the last. Zoe never glanced up. She stayed focused on the spark plug fiasco, her fingers moving with steady care as she reattached the plug the mechanic had accidentally yanked. Someone tried to jostle her aside as they wheeled in a glossy chrome beast, its wheels brand new engine purring like a pampered tiger. Zoe didn't protest or shift her stance. The rider ended up tripping over Zoe's foot, spitting out a curse. Her calm defiance, so silent it was almost eerie, made them scowl. More laughter rang out, this time from the group of female bikers, who took deep pleasure in mocking those they deemed unfit. "Check it out, barefoot princess wants to race with us," one sneered. "Maybe she'll bless the track with some good luck dust." Zoe, rising from her crouch, took stock of the swirling hostility. A faint clatter echoed as wrenches hit the metal workbench. The entire place seemed designed to make her feel small and unwelcome. Yet she stood in that circle of revving engines and did not speak a single syllable in her own defense. Viper, noticing that she had actually managed to fix the sabotage, cocked his head. "Don't bother. Just get out. Unless you want to watch from the sidelines." He gave her a slow grin that revealed glinting teeth. The gambler on his right pulled out another wad of bills, 50s by the looks of it, and let them flutter to the oily ground. "All that cash is yours if you somehow beat even one of us, sweetheart," he said. The challenge hung in the air like thick smoke. The bystanders ate it up. A few more strolled over to see the humiliated newcomer, waiting for her to grab the money in desperation or to storm off in tears. Instead, she slid a toe forward and nudged the scattered bills aside, not even bothering to pick them up. For a moment, everything paused. Zoe tightened the straps of her ancient helmet, the matte paint chipped around the edges, revealing an older decal beneath. A couple of older bikers squinted, trying to place where they'd seen that symbol before. Then, the noise roared back to life as the clock approached midnight time for the big race sign-ups. The local announcer, a wiry man with a cigarette dangling from his lips, barked through a bullhorn, "All riders to the queue. First come, first served." If your entry fee ain't paid, get lost. The crush of bikes, riders, and pit crews surged forward, leaving Zoe behind. A hush fell around her section of the garage as the mockers assumed they'd gotten rid of her. Zoe brushed the dust from her jacket, the fabric crinkling softly under her gloved fingers. Under that thin garment lay muscle memory of countless hours on hidden roads, a lifetime of practice that no one here had witnessed. The swirling lights of the overhead bulbs flashed across her scratched fuel tank, revealing faint swirling designs etched into the metal. If anyone had looked closely, they might have recognized the distinctive pattern as the handiwork of an outlaw mechanic from decades past. But no one bothered. They were too busy boasting about their fancy rides. Zoe rolled her bike forward, each footstep measured, never meeting the eyes of those who jeered. In that silence, there was a ferocity that made a few onlookers shift uncomfortably, though they didn't know why. She approached the sign-up table. A chunky ledger lay open, names scrawled in adrenaline-fueled script. The man behind the table was a heavy-set enforcer with a braided beard. He glanced up, saw Zoe's battered gear, and shook his head. He grunted, setting down his pen. You gotta pay the fee up front. And anyway, you ain't the type for this race. Zoe slid a stack of bills from her jacket pocket, enough to cover the entry. He blinked, uncertain, then gave an uneasy shrug. Fine, he muttered, scribbling her name where she pointed. But don't say I didn't warn you. He tore off a slip of paper and held it out. She took it without a word. An older gray-haired woman leaned against a battered toolbox nearby, watching this exchange through narrowed eyes. She wore a t-shirt that read Bones Crew, a relic from an older generation of riders who'd once ruled these illegal circuits. Her expression held a flicker of something like recognition as she caught a glimpse of the swirl etched into Zoe's bike. But she said nothing. Instead, she turned away, muttering about how the night was bound to get messy. Midnight arrived in a blaze of headlights and roaring engines. The official route, a twisting stretch of blacktop that cut through abandoned highways, defunct service roads, and a precarious bridge over a narrow gorge. Everyone knew it was a dangerous run. That was half the thrill. The other half was the steep betting pool. The gambler who'd mocked Zoe earlier swaggered around collecting final wagers. He paused by a group of rowdy spectators who catcalled the female bikers, then turned to flash Zoe a mocking grin. Last chance to back out, princess, he said, tapping the wad of bets in his vest pocket. She offered no acknowledgement, her eyes fixed on a spot of chipped paint on the gas tank, as though she were listening to a memory only she could hear. Engines revved in unison. The crowd pressed close, adrenaline dripping in the crisp air. Viper took his spot at the front black cruiser, gleaming under the halogen pit lights. The glam-flaunting bikers formed a flashy cluster, their matching leathers reflecting neon. Smoke drifted from exhausts. Zoe nudged her naked bike to an empty spot at the far edge of the starting line, a place nobody else wanted because it was littered with gravel. A hush. Then the makeshift race marshal, a lanky teenager with an oversized flannel jacket, raised a neon flag. Tires screeched. The pack lunged forward, roaring onto the dark back road. Zoe let them rush ahead, holding her throttle steady until she reached the main bend. Two riders already jostled for position, nearly colliding. She watched from behind, silent as ever. When a curve approached, she banked gracefully, letting her rear tire slide just enough to keep momentum. The others tore off into the distance, swallowed by the dusty gloom. Overhead, a sliver of moon cast pale light across pockmarked asphalt. Barely a quarter-mile into the route, onlookers in the pit predicted Zoe would never catch up. The gambler cackled, counting out fresh bills. The female bikers had shot off in a roar of confidence, eager to impress. Only the older spectators noticed something odd as the main group vanished. Zoe slipped away from the road altogether. Instead of following the route, she gunned the engine toward an unmarked dirt path that cut into a wooded rise. A hush of confusion spread among those who caught a glimpse. The rally staff shouted, "Hey!" Wrong direction. But it was too late. She was gone, swallowed by the thick silhouettes of pine and oak. Shouts of "disqualify her" broke out in the pit. Viper's pit crew members, monitoring from the garage, demanded immediate action. But the impromptu rules of this underground rally were murky at best. And the cameras. There weren't any official ones, just a few cheap phones or handheld recorders used by onlookers for personal thrill. The organizers whispered arguments back and forth. If she wasn't on the designated track, how could she possibly finish? Some shrugged. Let her get lost, they reasoned. That would be punishment enough for ignoring the route. No need to send a search party. Meanwhile, on the main stretch, the leading riders blasted down the cratered asphalt. They leaned into each turn with practiced confidence, headlights cutting through swirling dust. A few near misses happened at hairpin corners. One of the glam riders skidded, nearly flipping, but recovered with a shower of sparks. Viper maintained a dominant position near the front, a lethal combination of speed and intimidation. A chorus of curses arose as the group encountered unexpected construction debris along the route. Loose gravel. Haphazard barricades. This was the Midwest Midnight Rally. After all, danger was the main attraction. Still, nobody expected a half-collapsed bridge ahead, rumored to be out of commission for months. By the time the leaders arrived at that rickety crossing, panic set in. A jam formed. Bikes slowed. Viper hollered for them to keep moving, but the structure groaned under the slightest weight. Meanwhile, two riders at the back lost control in the bottleneck, their bikes careening off the edge into a muddy creek. Shouts and curses split the night. The sabotage-prone gambler, somewhere near the middle, decided to swerve around the chaos but ended up entangled in a mass of tangling handlebars. At the same time, deep within the woods, Zoe navigated a narrow, treacherous trail that twisted between looming trees. She cleared low-hanging branches, guiding her bike over bumpy roots and fallen logs. Her front tire kicked up sprays of mud, but she handled each hazard with fluid grace, as though she'd ridden this path 100 times before. Faint moonbeams glinted off the scratched tank, illuminating the swirling etch marks that looked almost like stylized wings. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. Zoe's jaw set in quiet resolve as she recalled an echo of laughter in a smaller, hidden clearing, an older man's voice teaching her to hear the forest's heartbeat when riding off-road. The memory flickered like a ghost in her peripheral vision. She stood on the pegs briefly to absorb a jolt never slowing. Back at the jammed bridge, frustration reached a boiling point. Riders shouted, engines revved uselessly, and a few tried to find alternate ways around. Some turned onto a half-visible dirt patch, but that led to a blocked ravine. Others argued about whether to risk the collapsing bridge in single file. Viper, seething, decided to push ahead, ignoring the moans of twisted metal as he edged his cruiser onto the deteriorating planks. Halfway across, the entire structure sagged dangerously. Heart rates soared. If one bike made it, maybe the others could too. But time was lost. By the moment they managed to regroup on the far side, nearly half the pack was either stuck injured or too spooked to continue at full speed. At the finish line, an abandoned parking lot strewn with random barrels and a single flickering lamp, organizers milled about collecting bets, anticipating a show of roaring engines bursting onto the final stretch. They expected Viper or one of the top riders first. When the gloom parted and a single headlight emerged from an overgrown side trail, confusion rippled through the watchers. A battered naked bike caked in mud and leaves rolled out. On it, a silent rider in a dusty khaki jacket. Zoe. She crossed the finish line with steady control engines sputtering, but undaunted, her presence so unexpected that the official with the checkered rag didn't even wave it at first. Only after a stunned beat did the official manage to raise the flag overhead. A faint cheer went up, scattered and unsure. "She cheated," yelled someone from behind. "She left the road." Another organizer barked into a walkie-talkie, trying to confirm the chaos. But all-around spectators who had lost money on bigger names started booing, demanding disqualification. Zoe eased the bike to a halt, dust swirling around her. She slipped off the helmet, revealing the smallest hint of a half-frown on her face. When a cluster of pit enforcers rushed up shouting accusations, she simply stepped off the bike and waited. One of the older staff members, whose jacket read Midwest Rally Crew in chipped letters, started flipping through a crumpled rule sheet. These rules never said we had to stay on the main track. They're more like guidelines. His voice wavered. But we usually assume the route is the route, you know. Others snatched the paper from him, desperate to find a clause that banned shortcuts. Tension built. Viper's supporters, panting and dusty from limping across the finish some minutes later, yelled about how the race was rigged. The gambler emerged nursing a bruised elbow, pointing an accusing finger at Zoe. "She can't do that. She wasn't even on the road," he hollered, voice cracking. A moment later, an older biker with scarred knuckles and a limp approached quietly. He peered at Zoe's bike with an odd, lingering gaze. "Those swirl marks, you do those yourself?" he asked, half to himself. She didn't answer. He reached out, almost reverent, and brushed a gloved hand across the scratched metal. Suddenly his eyes widened. Wait a damn minute," he muttered, glancing at Zoe's face. "You're Wild Jack's kid, Aren't you? A hush fell as if the entire crowd recognized the name in unison. Wild Jack, the legendary outlaw rider who'd vanished 20 years back after a notorious rally that changed the region's entire racing culture. He'd been the first to break unwritten protocols, forging new routes, defying the standard practice of relying on fancy upgrades. He was also rumored to have built bikes that ran on raw mechanical genius alone. Several bystanders reeled, uncertain what to make of this. Someone let out a disbelieving whistle. The gamblers and high rollers had heard the stories but assumed them myths. Now a real sense of awe gripped them. Meanwhile, Viper tried to brush it off. I don't care whose daughter she is. He spat. She broke the route and cheated. He turned to the men with the rule sheet. Throw her out. Zoe stood calmly still, not uttering a defense. She glanced at the battered bike, the same one her father had fine-tuned piece by piece in a hidden garage, teaching her every modding trick he knew. The swirl etched into the tank was his mark, the same swirl that once made local riders speak of him with both admiration and fear. A nervous debate erupted. Some argued that the route had always been fluid in these illegal races. Everyone took minor detours if they saw an advantage. Others insisted that a major deviation like plunging into the woods was beyond the pale. But one of the official record keepers tapping a cigarette ash onto the broken asphalt said, "Show me exactly where it says she can't find her own path." Silence. He held up the tattered rules. Yeah, it's not here. Some in the crowd realized they might owe Zoe more than a few thousand in winnings if she was declared first. The gambler who had tossed money at her feet glowered, his arrogance deflating by the second. In the hush, Zoe stepped forward. She touched the battered seat of her bike, then looked directly at the frenzied knot of race organizers. Her voice, when it came, was calm and level. There's no rule that says you can't survive smarter, she said. No rule that says you need a shiny bike to win. The real road belongs to those who push limits, not just to those with money and chrome. That was all she offered. The words carried a quiet authority, as though she'd been waiting all night to speak them. A shift in the atmosphere rippled through the watchers. Some scowled, others began to nod. Even the fiercely competitive glam bikers felt a twinge of respect, recalling how many of them had ended up stuck, while Zoe emerged unscathed. Viper fumed, but a few of his own crew members peeled away, unwilling to back him against the echo of truth in Zoe's words. The older staffers, those who remembered the old ways, started muttering about how the original spirit of the Midnight Rally was never about polished metal or official lanes. It was about innovation, nerve, and breaking free from stale tradition. The organizer in charge of awarding the pot paced around, raking his hair in frustration. Finally, with the crowd pressing in chanting for a real decision, he gave a resigned nod. She's the first to cross the line, he declared, his voice echoing in the night. She gets the prize. A roar of disbelief and applause rolled through the spectators. The gambler cursed under his breath, forced to hand over a chunk of money to the race staff for distribution. He glared at Zoe like she was the cause of every problem in his life. The glam riders exchanged uncomfortable glances, remembering how they'd mocked her just hours ago. And Viper. He stood off to the side, face twisted in contempt, muttering something about how the entire rally had been compromised. But the crowd was no longer with him. A wave of new excitement surged, as if the rally had just regained a piece of its authentic, dangerous soul. As the dust settled, some of the top event organizers conferred among themselves. Rumors spread that they would revise the entire rule structure for next year. "We can't just rely on a single track," murmured one official, his voice trembling with the thrill of reinvention. "Maybe let the riders choose their path as long as they reach the finish in one piece." Another nodded, eyes alight with the possibilities. "The spirit of this rally is to push boundaries, right? She's done exactly that. Who are we to say no?" Those in earshot heard the birth of a new standard. For the first time in decades, the Midwest Midnight Rally found itself on the verge of becoming something bigger. Bolder, no longer about a single route, but about the skill, cunning, and heart to navigate whatever lay ahead. Zoe watched the swirl of activity without much expression. She let her gaze linger on the shadows near the edge of the lot. A fleeting shape reminded her of an old silhouette, broad shoulders in a dusty jacket, a man turning wrenches by lantern light in a hidden workshop. The memory rose unbidden, triggered by the faint scent of motor oil and pine drifting from the forest behind them. She stood still as a statue, but inside there was a faint flicker of satisfaction. This was the race her father had told her about, the one he walked away from after betrayals by those who only cared about money and flash. He'd taught her to ride in silence, to let the roar of the engine speak. Word got around. "She's Wildjack's daughter," people whispered in awe and trepidation. That name carried weight. He was the ghost who'd once re-engineered bikes in ways nobody had seen before, who'd left the scene under a cloud of rumors about double-crossing sponsors and cutthroat deals gone sour. Some said he'd fled overseas. Others claimed he died on a lonely highway. All Zoe knew was that he'd shown her how to harness a machine's spirit without the constraints of conventional wisdom. Now she was the living proof of his legacy. She didn't brag, didn't posture. She just was. Night stretched on. Eventually, the awarding of prizes came around. A small podium had been erected in front of a battered chain-link fence. The gambler forced to part with a small fortune stood bitterly in the background. Viper avoided the ceremony altogether, skulking off on his black cruiser. The female bikers formed a half-circle, still dazzling but noticeably subdued. When Zoe stepped up to claim her victory, a handful of staff members hesitated, perhaps expecting her to say a few words. She merely placed a hand on the trophy, a tarnished metal sculpture of a biker, and nodded once. It was enough. In the days that followed, the entire underground racing scene buzzed with talk of the upset at the Midwest Midnight Rally. Word spread that the organizers had publicly announced their intent to revise the rules, allowing participants to choose their routes provided they navigated safely and arrived at the designated finish. Some riders balked, complaining that it removed the fairness of a single set track. Others were electrified. The rally's reputation soared. Sponsors who had once turned away from the lawless vibe now called to inquire about next year's event. And in every bar garage and workshop, the name Zoe Turner flared up in heated debates, half admired, half doubted. Yet Zoe did not linger in the spotlight. She took her winnings, stashed them in a small backpack, and rode off into the early morning hush. A handful of the older riders watched her go, exchanging meaningful looks as if they had witnessed the start of a new legend. Weeks later, folks discovered that she'd been invited to hold workshops at a high-profile bike academy, focusing on survival riding and off-road modding. The same bikers who once jeered at her for not fitting in now lined up to learn from her. They found themselves calling her teacher with no small measure of humility, remembering how their showy moves had failed in the real trial of skill. In those months, tales grew wilder. Some insisted Zoe was an heiress to a powerful fortune, pointing out the crisp bills she'd casually handed over for the race entry or the quality of the tools in her battered kit. Others swore she was simply an old soul living a modest life uninterested in money. The truth was hidden in subtle gestures, a certain calm refusal to take freebies from sponsors, the unspoken discipline that hinted at a strict upbringing. Behind the scenes, a few recognized her quiet aura of authority, guessing at a background far more privileged than she let on. But if she wore that privilege, she hid it under a layer of grime and dust. Now and then, the gambler, still smarting from public disgrace, tried to smear her name, claiming she'd cheated or bribed officials. Those rumors never gained traction. Viper, too, attempted to claw back some lost reputation, but his own crew had grown distant. They'd seen him lose his temper, fail to adapt, and let his pride overshadow the race's integrity. Sponsors walked away from him. He found himself overshadowed by talk of Zoe's unstoppable ride through that dark forest. Even the glam-flaunting female bikers distanced themselves, some quietly seeking out Zoe's new classes to improve their off-road skills. The humiliation had come full circle, not because Zoe set out to ruin anyone, but because their own arrogance had led to defeat. One night, months after the rally, a hush settled over a deserted stretch of back road near that same cluster of pines. Moonlight flickered across the battered sign, marking a boundary between highways. Zoe stood by her naked bike, the helmet cradled in one arm. She looked up at the tall trees swaying in a midnight breeze, listening, as if they whispered a memory she alone could hear. In the distance, a faint rumble signaled another group of riders testing the newly allowed alternate route for the next rally. She didn't rush to meet them. Instead, she knelt beside her bike, checking the chain tension with a gentle tug. Satisfied, she rose, kicked the engine to life, and rolled slowly along the forest's edge, recalling a man's voice teaching her how to read the subtle dips of an unmarked trail. The next day, a hush fell in one of the top biker academies when Zoe walked into a training hangar. Rows of newly minted riders, some with expensive gear, others with basic boots and jackets, stood at attention. They had been expecting a hotshot champion, a brash figure who'd brag about her exploits. Instead, they saw a woman in a simple jacket, hair pulled into a practical knot, stepping to the front without fanfare. For a moment, the students stirred, unsure if this was really the legend they'd heard about. Zoe didn't greet them with a speech. She simply placed a battered notebook on a bench, removed a set of carefully labeled sketches, and began showing them how to modify an engine for rough terrain. Her voice stayed calm, matter-of-fact, her entire being radiating the same composure that had once silenced an entire midnight crowd. Over time, many of those same students admitted that her quiet presence taught them more than any flashy demonstration could. They'd ask questions and she'd nod, guiding them with minimal words. Eventually, word spread that Zoe Turner's methods revolutionized the Academy's approach to survival writing and advanced modding. Sponsors began donating funds to implement her teachings in their official curriculum. Still, Zoe never sought the limelight. If a reporter approached, she would slip away, giving no interviews. By the next year, the Midwest Midnight Rally had officially transformed. Promotional flyers boasted, "Choose your road, prove your skill." The old main track remained, but now alternate paths were sanctioned, encouraging riders to strategize. The pot soared with new bets. Bikers from across the region arrived, some purely curious about these unorthodox rules. The moment they stepped into the pit, they saw a newly erected sign: "Roads are made to be discovered, not dictated." Beneath that slogan were two metallic swirl designs reminiscent of the marks on Zoe's fuel tank. It was the rally's subtle nod to the woman who had forced them to evolve. On race night, the watchers whispered rumors that Zoe might return, though nobody saw her at registration. The flashy bikes revved up, cameras flashed, and big names showed off new gear. But tucked near the shadow of an idling truck, a slender figure observed with quiet eyes. She recognized many faces, the gambler looking subdued, a few female riders wearing a new sense of humility, even Viper pacing, searching for redemption. Only a handful of watchers noticed her. By then, her presence had taken on an almost mythical status. She didn't need to enter the race again, she had already changed its core. When the engines erupted at midnight and the pack tore away, Zoe turned to leave. She passed the old ledger where names were scribbled, her footsteps light on the concrete. In the dim glow of a single overhead bulb, she paused, letting her fingers graze the dog-eared corner of a picture pinned to the wall, a black and white snapshot of a younger Wild Jack grinning at the camera beside a hand-built bike. No label explained its presence, but the swirl on the tank was unmistakable. She bowed her head for a moment, then walked out into the night air, letting the lingering echoes of roaring engines accompany her departure. Months bled into seasons. Now recognized in certain circles as the daughter of Wild Jack, Zoe fielded constant invitations to show off or lend her name to big sponsors. She refused them all. Instead, she traveled from track to track, offering quiet workshops on riding tough terrain with minimal resources. Some wealthy acquaintances from her shadowy personal background tried to lure her into building a high-tech operation or competing in sanctioned tournaments. She politely declined. Her wealth, unknown to those around her, was never flaunted, never turned into a golden brand. She owned her path, and that was enough. Word of her Spartan lifestyle puzzled many. Why ride the same scratched-up naked bike when she could afford the best? Why wear that faded khaki jacket with the faint smell of motor oil instead of custom leathers? Those who dared to ask got only a gentle shrug or a short statement along the lines of, "Value doesn't come from brand names. It comes from the mind and heart that dare to break limits." Over time, these simple words became a credo repeated among her admirers, bikers from all backgrounds who discovered that skill and passion trumped price tags. But the consequences for those who once ridiculed her were real. The gambler's credibility tanked when he failed to pay out a few more legitimate bets. Crowds booed him at subsequent events, and he eventually slunk away, rumored to be out of the racing scene altogether. Viper tried re-entering the new version of the rally, but his once loyal crew had scattered. He found himself overshadowed by younger, hungrier riders who had learned Zoe's style of creative route navigation. Reduced to a cautionary tale of pride before the fall, he was last seen riding alone. A bitter man haunted by the knowledge that he'd let arrogance destroy his empire. And so, Zoe Turner's legend grew not through public relations or staged announcements, but through hushed stories passed from rider to rider. Each recounting began the same way. She didn't speak, didn't scream. Just rode a dusty old bike off the beaten path. Students repeated tales of her advanced mechanical insight. Old-timers swore that if you saw a swirl design etched on a fuel tank, it meant the spirit of Wild Jack lived on, father to the woman who redefined the game. But Zoe herself never claimed any titles, never demanded worship. She merely showed up where she was needed, taught whoever was willing, and moved on. Late one evening, after a long workshop at a quiet farmland racetrack, Zoe found herself alone beside a row of pines that reminded her of the route she had once taken. The moon rose behind her, illuminating the battered bike. She unzipped a small pouch strapped near the tank and pulled out an old snapshot, a man in a wide grin, an arm around a much younger version of herself. The swirl motif was etched on that man's own jacket, an emblem of father and daughter. Zoe touched the photo lightly as though to confirm it was still real, then tucked it back into the pouch. Her gaze lifted to the sky. She stood there for a long moment, listening to the faint rustle of the wind in the treetops. Then she swung a leg over the seat and kicked the bike to life. The next morning, a flurry of excitement spread at the farmland track. People claimed they'd seen Zoe in the moonlight, heard her engine fade into the distance, but she'd vanished by dawn. In her absence, she left a set of meticulously handwritten tips for advanced off-road riding pinned to the door of the local riding club. The members discovered it and regarded the notes like sacred scripture, passing them around in hushed reverence. Her quiet generosity extended far beyond the money she'd won or the classes she taught. She offered knowledge that could change how riders viewed the world. Back in the city, the newly formed board of the Midwest Midnight Rally gathered to finalize details for the next season. They released a statement. From this day on, the rally welcomes alternate paths. If you finish clean, you've earned your victory. The press latched onto this radical change, some praising it as a step toward innovation, others dismissing it as chaos. Yet the board members remained firm, referencing the spirit of old-school competition and a new wave of skillful riding that had captured everyone's imagination. Unspoken but understood was Zoe's influence. Her name appeared nowhere in the official statement, but it ran through the text like an invisible signature. Months later, in the heart of the Midwest, an expanded rally drew the largest turnout in its history. Riders from multiple states arrived, each with their own plan for tackling the unpredictability of the new system. Journalists hovered, hungry for an angle. Whispers circulated that Zoe might make a surprise appearance. But as the race began, no sign of her. In truth, she had quietly positioned herself at a vantage point off route, hidden among tall grass near a ridge. From there she could see the main track and a weaving side trail. She watched with mild interest as riders attempted what she'd done a year ago, some with success, some with spectacular failure. She did not cheer or jeer. She simply observed her presence, known only to the wind. When a handful of them managed to crest the ridge and stumble upon her, they stared in disbelief, expecting either condemnation or coaching. Zoe simply gave a curt nod, gesturing toward a safer path that curved around a rock slide. They followed, eyes wide with thanks, and she soon vanished behind a bend. Later, those riders recounted how a mysterious figure in a dusty jacket had guided them to the finish, ensuring they avoided the worst obstacles. They described the swirl on her tank, the silent authority in her posture. Word of this encounter spread, fueling the legend further. By the time the final race concluded, a wave of public endorsement soared for this new format. Sponsors that once insisted on a singular route changed their tune, praising the innovative structure. The official rally host took to a makeshift stage in front of thousands of cheering fans. The old rulebook, frayed and outdated, was ceremonially burned in a metal drum, replaced by a new code that explicitly encouraged creative navigation. This wouldn't be possible without those who dared to test the limits, the host announced. Riders like Zoe Turner, who showed us it's not about following someone else's track, it's about making your own. Zoe, of course, was long gone by that point, halfway down a dusty road that stretched into farmland. She carried with her the same battered helmet, the same scratched bike that had once caused a room full of sneering onlookers to laugh. She had no interest in wearing the champion's crown they offered. Her mission was complete. The rally would never again dismiss a rider based on appearances or resources. Those who scorned her. The proof of their misguided judgments lay scattered on broken highways and abandoned pit stops. Their reputations crumbled, not because Zoe set out to crush them, but because in the face of her genuine skill and composure, their pettiness stood exposed. Some lost sponsorships, others were ostracized from the new wave of riders. They had chosen mockery over curiosity, arrogance over humility, and in the end, the world moved on without them. Through it all, Zoe's name became synonymous with a quiet revolution. Letters arrived at the Biker Academy requesting her workshop sessions. Struggling local racing leagues wrote to ask if she would oversee their transition to more open rules. She never sought or demanded credit. She taught, then disappeared. In that pattern, a generation of riders discovered they could value skill, adaptability, and a certain moral code that no sponsor or showy outfit could buy. On a warm summer evening, Zoe returned to the place where it all began, that forest path near the rotted bridge. The night was calm. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead, carrying the scent of moss and mud. She dismounted, letting the bike rest against a trunk. Her jacket's folds bore fresh scuffs from a recent ride through rocky terrain, but the swirl on the fuel tank still caught the moonlight. She stepped onto the remains of the collapsed bridge, its broken planks strewn about. In the distance, she imagined the faint echo of old engines, roaring men and women shouting the gambler, tossing money on the ground. Her mind conjured a brief memory of an older man's low laugh as he showed her how to slip through the woods instead of following the beaten track. She knelt, pressed a palm lightly to one of the weathered planks, and exhaled. The next morning, folks found fresh tire tracks leading away from that ruin, weaving a path into the deeper forest. Some local kids who explored the area said they found a small patch of trampled grass on a hillside as though someone had parked there for hours. They swore they saw swirling designs etched into the bark of a nearby tree. And in that swirl, they recognized the same symbol from stories of Zoe Turner. Still, she moved on. Wherever a new rally or a fresh riding scene took shape, rumors of her presence cropped up. Sometimes it was just a quick sighting, a figure in a worn khaki jacket riding a naked bike. Other times it was the subtle gift of new mechanical parts left at a workshop's door. Gradually, even official racing bodies reached out, offering her top instructor roles, safe housing a chance to expand her father's legacy publicly. She refused choosing a solitary road bound more to the spirit of discovery and personal challenge than to any institutional stage. When all was said and done, Zoe had not only won a race, she had transformed the very fabric of an underground world. She didn't radiate arrogance or fling insults back at those who once mocked her. She simply stood firm, using the knowledge passed on by a father who refused to bow to rules that stifled imagination. That knowledge fueled a movement that recognized true skill had nothing to do with shiny chrome and everything to do with courage and creativity. By the time the next year's Midwest Midnight Rally rolled around, the hype was unstoppable. Ticket sales unofficial, though they were soared. Entire caravans of riders showed up, many new to the scene, hoping to carve their own routes. In the margins of every sign-up sheet, the swirl design appeared printed on flyers or painted on tents as if to say, "The road is yours if you dare." The question on every spectator's lips was whether Zoe would grace them again with her silent, unstoppable presence. But nobody could say for sure. The only certainty was that the race would never revert to its old ways of gatekeeping and mockery. On that opening night, a hush fell as the coordinator stepped forward to give the signal. Engines revved in unison under the moonlight. The final words before the start were, "Choose your track. Finish how you will." The roar that followed shook the trees. In the distance, on a little-known spur of the forest trail, a single headlight might have flickered before disappearing into the depths of night, forging a new path that no one else had discovered yet. And if you ask the older, wiser bikers about it, they'll speak in hushed tones of a woman who refused to be defined by any label or route. They'll mention how she neither boasted nor wept, even when every insult in the book was hurled her way. They'll recall how she showed up in a dusty jacket, fixed what others sabotaged, and won, not by playing the game, but by changing it. They'll say she still returns from time to time, checking those forest trails where she once tested the impossible, remembering a father who taught her that real roads have no boundaries. And when they finish telling the story, they'll leave you with a quiet sense of wonder about how the simplest presence can upend an entire system. Because maybe Zoe never truly left. Maybe she's still out there on that old naked bike, swirling past the constraints of standard thought, proving that any road can be conquered if you have the guts to carve your own path. To this day, the new generation of riders calls her a legend, an icon of possibility. But Zoe herself only ever claims to be a woman who remembers what it means to keep moving. She rides that same old bike despite offers of the latest models and sleek custom rigs. Sometimes folks see her in the forest at twilight, pausing near a half-hidden trail. And when they ask why she refuses to upgrade, she just shakes her head, placing one gentle hand on the worn seat. Value doesn't come from brand names, she says, voice low and calm. It comes from the mind and heart that dare to break limits. Perhaps that's all anyone needs to know, one quiet rider forging routes no one else could imagine. And each time we think of her, we realize that the track we're on might be bigger, wilder, and more open than we ever dared believe. Sometimes late at night, an old engine's echo resonates through the dark highways. It carries the memory of a woman in a khaki jacket who never sought glory, yet changed the world behind her. And in those echoes, you can almost feel her father's spirit guiding her through the hush of pine forests and hidden roads. For anyone who's ever been laughed at or pushed aside, remember Zoe's story. It's not about vengeance or drama. It's about standing firm in your worth, letting skill and conviction do the talking. It's about riding your own line, even if the crowd shouts that you don't belong. In that unwavering silence lies the power to rewrite the rules. And in the end, the midnight road stands open, beckoning you to find your own paths. If you listen close, you might hear the distant hum of her engine reminding you that no horizon is off limits. All it takes is the courage to twist the throttle brake from the pack and trust the hidden trails under the moonlight. Remember that courage. Remember her, because the spirit of a truly free rider never fades.